Yeah, we are live now.
Yeah.
Thanks, Varsha. Welcome to all the audience joining on Zoom and joining on YouTube. So we are just waiting for a couple more minutes as more participants are joining. Those who are joining from Zoom and YouTube, please type in the chat box your name, where you're joining from, and what's your favorite bird. Hi, Abir. Hi, Briti. Nice to see you all. Could you please type where you're joining from and what's your favorite bird or which class you study?
We'll start in another minute or so. We're just waiting for a couple more people to join.
Thanks, Sagarika. Thanks, Sarah. Sagarika's favorite bird is a robin, and for Sarah, it is peacock and an owl. Lovely.
Shubham, I think that's the case with most of the um, uh, uh, with most of us who we can't choose which our favorite bird is because we like all of them so much.
I think we should start, Amrita.
Yes.
Um, I'm just going to hit the record button. Do you usually do record to the cloud?
Yes. Yes. So we'll be recording this session and it is live on YouTube as well. The recording is for our personal, uh, like our database to just have it as a backup, but it's live for audience to be who are watching us on YouTube. So yes, let's get started. So, hello everyone, and a warm welcome to all of the young birders that have joined us on Zoom and all the adults who are tuning in on YouTube. Thank you for joining. I'm Amrita from a project called Early Bird that is under the Nature Conservation Foundation. We work towards connecting kids with nature. And today I have with me is a colleague Mittal who is working uh, with uh, Bird Count India, which is an umbrella of birding groups and institutions that work towards encouraging bird watching and citizen science. Both of us will be moderating the session today. And we are so excited to have Uma Krishnaswami, the author of Birds on the Brain, with us today. Welcome, Uma.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So, this session is part of Early Bird's monthly Young Birders series. In this series, we bring experts for young birders like you to interact with and for you to learn more about birds and other forms of biodiversity. And in today's session, we'll be interacting with Uma and hearing about her recent book. Today's session is organized and is in collaboration with Early Bird, Bird Count India, and Duckbill, which is an imprint of Penguin India. So over to you, Mittal, to introduce Uma and to share with us some housekeeping rules.
Thanks, Amrita. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thanks, Amrita. And hi, everyone. Hello, Uma. We are so excited to have this webinar with you. And a quick introduction about Uma. So, Uma Krishnaswami was born in Delhi and now lives in British Columbia in Canada. Her numerous publications include picture books, middle grade novels, early readers, poetry, and nonfiction. Birds on the Brain is a sequel to an earlier novel called Book Uncle and Me. Uma is also winner of the Scholastic Asian Book Award, the Crossword Award, and the International Literacy Association Social Justice Literature Award. She has been nominated twice for the prestigious Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award. She is faculty emerita writing for children and young adults, Vermont College of Fine Arts. So thanks, Uma, for joining in. Welcome, a warm welcome to you. I know it's very early, but thanks for joining in. And before we start, let's quickly go over a few housekeeping rules so that everyone here has a pleasant experience. For all those joining us on Zoom, we have kept all of you on mute. So in case you want to speak or share, please use the chat box. And this session is being live streamed. So we would request you to keep your videos off. And we recommend all of you joining on Zoom and YouTube to please use earphones for audio clarity. We'll take a few questions towards the end of the moderated Q&A. So make a note of your questions or feel free to use the chat box. And YouTube viewers, please use the chat box to ask questions or share comments. And thanks, Amy and Varsha, our colleagues, for helping us with the backend support. Thanks. Over to you, Amrita.
So now we'll start with the moderated session, and like Mittal said, we'll get to the Q&A from audience after this. So welcome, Uma, and we are really excited for this opportunity to interact with you and know more about the books and birding, bird watching, and all of it. So let's get started with the basics. Could you tell us about Bird on the Brain and introduce us to the main characters?
Yes. So first of all, thank you very much, Amrita and Mittal and everybody who has worked so hard to put this together. About 12 years ago, a long time ago, I wrote this book, and it's called Book Uncle and Me, and it's about three friends, Yasmin and Rini and Anil. And Yasmin wants to read a book every day for the rest of her life. And that became the premise of the story, because the elderly retired teacher who had a pavement lending library ran into problems. And so, of course, the three friends stepped in to help. Then a few years ago, during the COVID-19 pandemic, I was doing a Zoom talk through the North Vancouver library system here in Canada. And during the Q&A section, one of the kids, maybe in grade 3 or something, asked, is there going to be a sequel to Book Uncle and Me? And I said, jokingly, I don't know, should there be? And then they had a little conversation and everybody thought, yes, there should be one. And somebody suggested maybe there should be two because there are three friends. And so that idea stuck with me. And pretty soon I found myself writing Birds on the Brain, which is written in the viewpoint of Yasmin's friend, Rini. And there will be a book 3 as well, and it's coming out next year. And that is from Anil's point of view. So to tell you a little bit about Birds on the Brain, Rini is wild about birds. So like, I think some of you. And when the local bird count seems threatened, she realizes that she has to get involved. Of course, she pulls in her two best friends, and then in short order, they are planning a survey of the neighborhood. They're resolving problems that crop up among themselves. and they're taking on the grown-ups in their lives. Oh, and they're facing the mayor, and then eek, they're facing the entire city government. How can kids possibly do this and hope to win? That's the story.
That's lots happening in a kid's life. But you mentioned that Reedy is the character who loves birds a lot. So my next question would be, how did you come up with a character like her who is so passionate, so crazy about birds? And another question would be, do you have a part of you reflect as Reedy? Like,
Oh, that's a great question. I suppose there is a little bit of me in her because there's a little bit of me in every character that I create. When you are a writer, your own mind and your own emotions are really the only things you've got to work with. You can go figure out, stuff. You can do research and find out facts. But in the end, if you want to make emotional connections, this is all I've got. So what are the things that are part of me in Rini? Well, she won't take no for an answer. And I can be stubborn in that way. She's obsessed with birds, a little bit like I'm obsessed with writing. But essentially, this isn't just about Rini. It's a story about a kid who pays attention to what's going on around her, but it's also a story about a group of friends and their families and the community around them and where they all fit into the big wide world. Because you know what? None of us can do anything all by ourselves. All of us need other people. We need families, we need friends, we need communities. And that's what these Book Uncle books, including Birds on the Brain, are really about.
Thanks, Uma, for the lovely insight. And you're right. I think if you want to get people notice birds, and you have to do your best. And I love the way Rini has put her foot down to make sure that everybody notices birds and participates in the bird count. Talking about bird count, you've done something amazing by weaving bird counts and citizen science into the narrative. And since bird counts are often seen as activities for adults, how did you make them exciting and relatable for a young birder like Rini?
So the way I see it, children live in the same world as adults, and they are not blind to its many facets, both positive and negative. If anything, I think kids have sharper powers of observation than grown-ups do. Maybe in part because their minds are just not as cluttered with many daily preoccupations as ours are. So the other thing that I thought about as I was writing this is that many scientists who make remarkable contributions to our understanding of the natural world have memories of their own childhood interests that ended up leading to this sort of lifelong search for knowledge that really is what the sciences are about. And so the very first scene I wrote ended up becoming the first chapter of Birds on the Brain. And this doesn't always happen. Most of the time I write openings and then I end up throwing them away because by the time I write the rest of the book, the first scene kind of becomes unnecessary. Maybe I've told too much or I've given away something in the first scene, and almost always my first scene goes away. But in this book, in the first book, Rini was a secondary character. And the only thing I'd written about her interests in Book Uncle was that she was wild about movies, and she was also wild about all wild things. And so I didn't know what to do with that, but I knew that I needed to know more about her. So I put her up on the rooftop on her block of flats, and then I started writing the scene. And as I wrote it, this bird flew into a rooftop, and there she was, trying to figure out what the bird was. And when I sent those early drafts to my editor, she said, what was it that made Rini focus her interest in birds? Because in the first book, it's a little broader than that. And now if you read the opening of the second chapter, you'll see Rini's account of how birds became an absorbing interest for her. So I didn't know all this at the outset. It was something that I found out about as I wrote, which happens quite often. At least I don't plot ahead of time. So this is pretty much how I write, kind of hanging on to a rope and hoping that it'll go somewhere.
Well, that's very interesting, and that also actually leads to my second question. Like you said, the thought came to you when a bird flies, and you're wondering what bird it is. So every bird watcher, they rely on tools for identifying birds. And do you have any go-to tools? Could you share some of your favorites with us?
Oh, sure. So, of course, books, right? I mean, I wouldn't be a writer if I didn't say that books were my absolutely favorite tool. The very first bird book I bought about Indian birds was, of course, one by Salim Ali, and it was his Indian hill birds. And I was in the Nilgiris at that time, and I was trying to identify things that were fluttering around me. This was years ago. And of course, you will find Zai Whitaker's wonderful picture book about her famous ornithologist uncles, Salim, Mamu, and me, referenced in the book as well. I have other field guides on my shelf behind me, Audubon field guides to North American birds and others on my shelf. But I also started using eBird several years ago. And of course, eBird is a worldwide app that, it's a worldwide app where you can spot birds and log them in. And when you start using eBird, it's going to look something like this, right? So you can see, you start your checklist, and here are a bunch of, I pulled up some of the checklists I did back in May. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, so you can see all my Indian checklists there. And when you use eBird, the wonderful thing is that your data goes directly into this massive database maintained by ornithologists at Cornell University in upstate New York in the United States. But of course, the problem is when you first start out, how do you log a bird in if you don't know what you're looking at? So now there's another app, Merlin, which is also quite wonderful. Let me pull up my Merlin for you. And you can browse through lists of species here, and you can see some of the ones that I've found on Merlin, right? And this is also from some of my India lists.
Lovely.
And you can also do this cool thing where you can record bird songs using your bird calls using your phone. And there's a bunch of calls that I recorded in Yerkad, which is this little hill station in the Chevrolet Hills in Tamil Nadu. So would you let's hear that sound file?
Yes, Amrita, would you play the sound file? I would request everyone to increase their volume on their phone or laptop so that you can hear it loud and clear. And those who can hear it can also write if they can identify what bird it is. Yeah, any more answers coming from different places? You can use the local name, you can use the language you recognize this bird. I see Manoj has written kuturu, and yeah, it does sound like kuturu.
Yeah, it is. In fact, it's a white-cheeked barbet.
Yeah, isn't that
Yeah,
cool?
you can always, so Merlin, it's not always correct. Because it depends on, and this is the wonderful thing, that the database keeps growing. The more you put into it, the more the database grows, and the better it will be for other people who will come to use it for, I mean, generations, right? Another fun fact, the computer scientist who devised the software that the Cornell database is based on was the husband of a children's writer, Jane Yolen. And David Stemple passed away some time ago, but that's his legacy. So you see, you can be creative in lots of different ways and birds just, there are so many different ways to approach a love of birds and an interest in them. And yes, this was a call of the white-cheeked barbet.
Thanks, Suma. Please go ahead. Please add in case.
So I'm just saying it was a lot of fun for me to play with all this while I was writing the book. And in fact, some of those lists that you saw from on the Merlin list and the eBird logins, I even went birding a couple of times in Chennai and around, sort of pretending that I was Rini, forgetting that I was this, 60-something-year-old woman, and pretending that I was Rini in my book, and thinking, what would a kid like that pay attention to, and what would she see and hear? So that was really fun.
So that's really cool. And all the adults and parents joining this webinar, please, if you haven't tried Merlin, do check it out. And it's really a cool thing. You can just stand in your balcony, and if there is a bird calling, just click on the sound ID, and Merlin perhaps can identify it and give you a list of possible birds. And then you can even match that. It will also have its own sound file. So you can match and confirm whether the bird that you're hearing is the same as that Merlin has been suggesting. So do try it out. Amrita, over to you.
So it is really nice to know, Uma, that you were trying to be Rini and trying to look at the world through her lens. So while doing so, was there any fun fact about birds that you came across while writing the book, while during your experience of watching birds in India and elsewhere in the process of this book?
Fun facts. I found out a lot more about sunbirds and their nests and nesting habits, which was actually delightful because it played right into what I needed to have happen in the book, and I'm not going to give that away to you, but I had a lot of fun learning about that. I didn't know very much about sunbirds. And of course, I've seen, the parallel to sunbirds in the Western Hemisphere is our hummingbirds, which are also really tiny and build really intricate nests and sip nectar and eat insects on the wing. So that was a lot of fun for me to just learn more about species that are not in my immediate environment all the time.
Here's a sneak peek into the illustration that talks about the sunbird nest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
So sunbird nests are also one of my favorite birds that I've seen nesting up close. So yeah, it's really like a close memory to me as a kid, seeing them nest outside my window. So.
I remember from my childhood, and this is the wonderful thing about birding, is once you start paying attention to birds, you start to remember all the birds you ever seen, and then you start to put things together. So, I mean, I remember seeing weaver birds in Delhi and around there, and that is really fascinating how they build their nests and how they cluster them in colonies sometimes, and it's just really pretty amazing. So. Yeah, birds are architects.
Yes, they surely are. Birds
Yes,
are. That's the best way to put it.
Yeah, some of them are sloppy, some of them are incredibly refined and perfectionists. And look at the materials they use, like straw, mud, grass, just anything. As sometimes little shiny human objects will go in there as well. It's quite wonderful.
Very creative and versatile. So coming to the next question, it kind of pulls back from something you said earlier, that a lot of these activities and actions, interests kind of work only if there is like a community, there is some support from adults, from your peers. So in this story, basically the three kids who were the three best friends are kind of on a mission to save their neighboring green spaces so that they can kind of take part in the bird count that's coming up. And so I wanted to, my question would be here is, what is something that from your end you would like to share with the kids, the young birders who are here, what they can do to kind of imbibe such things from the character, and how parents or guardians or adults around them can, how they can facilitate and support such actions?
Yeah, so one of the things that has always struck me is that, children observe things, and I think if as a young person in this audience, some of you, I think, are already doing this, you are interested in birds, you're enthusiastic about them, and maybe some of you are thinking, oh, maybe this is something I could get into. I think you need to follow what those interests are, and often they are not about, that doesn't come from the head, it comes from the heart. It comes from just things that interest you or intrigue you or make you feel excited or make you feel good. And then when you see that there are things that need to be done, or you should speak up. And for parents, I would say just take. We're often very separate from the natural world, and I think the natural world is incredibly important for us, and also for young people. There is so much to be, we hear about all the health benefits of being out in natural places, in forests, and by the ocean, and up in mountains, whatever. Here's the thing about birds. Wherever you are, there are also birds. And wherever you are, you can, if there isn't a group of people following birds and paying attention to them and using these apps maybe, or just getting together in groups to look at them, well, how much does it take to make a group like that? And to become an extension of what is really a worldwide birding community. So I think communication, and then just slowing down a little bit and paying attention to the world around you, those are the two things that matter here.
So I really with early bird, our kind of focus to use birds has been that, because wherever you go, you would see them. They are very fascinating. They are colorful most of the time. It can be a very easy way to get people to observe, and like you said, slow down, look, and observe.
Yeah. And you know what else? I mean, India is on the migratory path of just thousands and thousands of species of migrating birds. So then you have birds that are there all year round, and then you have birds that fly through in the wintertime, because where are they going to go from really cold places? And they come from incredibly far away. So you have water birds that come from Northern Europe, Siberia, just places where it gets too cold. And I think that's a way of even thinking about how the world is interconnected, because birds don't know about national boundaries and borders, and they don't, but they are affected by things that people do. So that's another way to look at this.
Yeah, that's so true, Uma. And I also think that to know these things, which birds are resident, live around you throughout the year, or which birds are migratory, they are seen either only during summers, or there are some migrants which come only during the winters. To know all these things, it is good to be outdoors as often as you can, of course, depending upon the circumstances and opportunities. And that's one interesting thing which Early Bird does, is they have bird walks for children in Bangalore, and there are many other educators across our network which do these kind of bird walks in different places. And one of the message that I would also like to share with the adults joining, if they're joining on this group, is that there are a lot of birding events that happen in India, bird watching and bird count events. And it would be nice to take your children, take your family. It could be like a family outing, or it could just be a nature outing, to be outdoors and to learn all these things: which birds are migratory, which birds are residents, which birds make the long journey. And there are some birds which only come for they are just here for a few days of time, few days of the week. They just stay for in India for a few days, feed on insects, and then they fly all the way to Africa. They come from Europe, cross India, stay there for a few days, and go all the way to Africa. So it's quite fascinating to when you start learning about these birds. And so one thing we did not mention is bird count. Would you be able to tell our young audience what does the word bird count mean, and what does one has to do?
Right. So I can tell you the way from my experience of it. And so I have never been professionally involved with organizing a bird count or being part of it in that way. But essentially, it's really simple. It's you spend a dedicated amount of time, a part of a day, you make a commitment to go out there and be part of this big count of birds. And you just essentially log in all the birds that you spot. You listen, you look, and you record. And different groups will have different ways of doing this and different ways of entering that data into that worldwide system that I told you about. But essentially, that's it. You go individually or you go in a group and you look for birds. That's how you spend your time. It's a wonderful thing. I was involved with a bird count in New Mexico years and years ago. This was quite a long time ago, before all the apps got developed and before it became as easy to do as it is now. We used to keep paper checklists, but it was quite amazing. And I saw birds that I didn't ever realize were right there out in the desert.
Thanks, Uma. Arita, do you have any more questions?
Yes. So, one question before we open up the floor for audience questions is, like, all readers do have a favorite book or a favorite part in their favorite book. And similarly, I believe you would also have a favorite scene or favorite part from the birds on the brain. So, would you like to share about it and also maybe read a snippet out of the book for us?
Oh, sure. I actually have many favorite parts, but I'll read you this one from chapter 5, which is titled "It's a Sign." And it's a passage that actually references Bird Count India. So I thought it might be an appropriate one for this gathering. Okay. Chapter 5, "It's a Sign." This is not the whole chapter. It's just a couple of snippets of it. Book Uncle is right where he should be. He is behind the counter in his little kiosk with the sign that reads, "Books, free, give one, take one, read, read, read." Book Uncle is our ally. Of course he is. But at the moment, he is one busy ally. We decide to approach him later. We squeeze past the crooked tree that juts out into the road. It has a sign on it, too. The sign reads, "Caution, protruding tree." That is a silly sign. Surely anyone coming along in a car or on a scooter or a bicycle or even on 2 feet like us can see that it is a tree and that it's protruding, which Yasmin says means it is sticking out. Right then, in the middle of all this, I see something. It wasn't there this morning, I'm sure of it. It is a new ad plastered across the front of the bus shelter roof. Bus shelter ads are usually for banks or jewelers' shops, fizzy drinks or soaps. This one is for none of those things. This one is not even selling anything. As I take a closer look, I see a picture of a lake with a tree in the middle. The sky and the tree and the lake are all full of birds. Where is this place? The poster has one of those codes you can scan on your phone that will take you to a website if you have a phone, which we do not. And there are a couple of dates. Running along the top are big, beautiful letters. This is what they say. Bird Count India, do your bit. If that is not a sign, I say, then I am DD. Yasmin looks blank, so I quickly explain. It's a birding term. Like LC is least concern, DD means data deficient. So there you go.
That's a lovely segue into letting people ask questions. And so I hope people, so at any point, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, you will have to use the raise hand reaction on Zoom, or you can use the chat box to drop your questions. So we'll start with the questions on Zoom. So if you want to ask questions or interact with Uma, please raise your hand and we can unmute you. Yes, and we'll try to take questions that are directly relevant to this session, and the other questions which are generally about birds, you can write to us later and we can give you more information on that. So there's a question for you, Uma, in the chat which says, doing us, what is your favorite bird? Do you have one?
I know it was in the chat earlier too, favorite birds, and I was thinking, how am I going to pick a favorite bird? It's like asking me to pick a favorite book. I don't know. Here's the thing. In Indian history, there was, you probably know about this, there was a time when India was newly independent and they were picking a national bird. And among the contenders were the great Indian bustard and of course, the peacock. And the peacock is such an incredible bird that, of course, how could it not win out, right? Nobody else has a bird like the peacock. Well, maybe the birds of paradise can contend to some degree, but the peacocks are just flamboyant and beautiful. But the great Indian bustard is also really interesting. It lives out in the desert and it has a wide range and it lives in terrain that we would find completely inhospitable, hot and dry. So I find myself really drawn to big birds like that live in places that we would find difficult. So that's my kind of favorite bird. Raptors as well, eagles and hawks and things like that, because they're so powerful and they have these enormous wingspans and they do this amazing thing that we don't know. And yes, now I see the Indian bustard is critically endangered. So I often think, had we made it our national bird, would it have had a chance? So yeah, that's something I feel sad about, but also, it tells me that there's this hope that if we focus on birds the way Bird Count India, the way Early Bird is doing, then we can, if we call attention to these beautiful species, maybe we can make enough people care to save some of them and to protect spaces where they can live and thrive.
Yeah, and we hope everyone in this and beyond, the audience here and beyond, kind of gets inspired from the three kids who are taking action towards protecting whatever small areas that are around them. I think small actions kind of will have a bigger butterfly effect eventually.
Definitely. That's the whole point of communities of citizen science, right? That everybody can observe, everybody can have input. And by doing that, even you create this little ripple effect of people who care.
Yeah, that's true.
Uma, we have a question You have written extensively for children. How does writing a story like Birds on the Brain differ from other works you have authored?
It's different. It was different in the sense that it was a sequel, right? And because I knew the characters already from book one, I could just dig a little deeper with this one, and that was really fun to do. It was like going back to a place that I had been before, but just having a different tour guide. So Rini was leading me through the same spaces that we had encountered in Book Uncle and Me, the same neighborhood, which is sort of loosely modeled on a neighborhood where my parents used to live in Chennai years ago. And I was just seeing it from a different child's viewpoint. So that was different from any other book where I'd have to create the entire thing from scratch. For a book that needed to stand alone. This one not only needed to stand alone, I mean, you can read Birds on the Brain and you don't even need to read any of the other books to understand what I'm trying to say there. But if you do read both of them, they also need to hang together. They need to not be in contradiction with one another. So that was interesting and different. That made it different from anything else I've written.
And someone has something related to your previously written books. One question was, I think you did mention this earlier, but if you can again mention, when was it that you wrote the first book? And to add to that question, I'm adding a question of my own because I'm curious what kind of, for that like Book Uncle and Me, what was your kind of inspiration towards that? What just sparked that you want to write a story on those lines?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll start with Book Uncle and Me. It was really I was visiting my parents in Chennai, and I was walking to the shops. I think I was running an errand for my mother or something, and I was walking on the pavement and getting ready to cross the road. And there was this girl, she was sitting it's in the middle of the pavement, cross-legged, and she was reading a book. And I thought, and she was oblivious. There were people walking by her, there were buses going by, and autos in the street, and cyclists. And I mean, it was an Indian city. And she was oblivious to them all. She was sitting there cross-legged reading a book. And I thought, oh, there's a story here. I wonder what it is. And there was an election going on at the same time. So part of the noise and chaos was these vans going by, blaring messages from all of the different political parties. And I thought, okay, how can I put these two things together? And that's how Book Uncle and Me came to be. I had also, I mean, I remember lending libraries from my childhood, and they're certainly still there in many Indian cities. There are little booths or places or kiosks where you can go and give a book and take a book, and that's how all of this came together for me. And now I've forgotten the first half of your questions. So I've got them again.
So the question was just when did you write it?
So I wrote Book Uncle, I would say maybe 14 years ago. It got published 12 years ago. It got rejected. I submitted it first to American publishers. It got rejected quite a bit. They thought it was a little too agenda driven, and they thought, are kids really going to be interested in politics? And right, haha. And then I submitted it to a competition in Singapore. So this goes back to my point about Rini and not giving up. Don't give up. If there's something you really want to do not give up. Hang on to it. And if it's really good, and if you get really good at it, then it will happen. So I submitted it to a competition in Singapore, and it won. And that was the Scholastic Book Award. Then it got published by Scholastic India at the time. So all of that is just goes to say, if you have a good idea, just hang on to it.
That's a really lovely message, Uma. And for young audience like we have today, not to give up if you really are passionate about it.
I also I've been wanting to ask you this, and this is what I do every time I meet someone who is a nature enthusiast, and we get to talking to know their story. Like, Uma, have you always been connected to the outdoors, to nature, to birds, or is it something which you picked up, like, something got you interested in this, and then you also started having them in your books?
Mm. Yeah, so I didn't even realize that there were birds in Book Uncle and Me, really. They just sort of were there. There were pigeons and there were these other birds. They just kind of crept into the book. I wasn't intending to write a sequel. I wasn't intending to write a book about birds. They just happened. I don't remember. To be honest, I don't remember. As a child, I was an only child. So I spent a lot of time by myself. I read a lot as a child. I read everything I could lay my hands on. And if I didn't have a new book to read, I'd just read the same one over again. And we lived in Pune then, and there was a tree. It was this big tree it was a banyan tree outside the house. And I used to climb up into the tree with my books where no one could find me. And I used to sit there and read. And my mother used to come and call me for lunch, and I wouldn't come, and she would get annoyed, and all that stuff. So those are some of my earliest memories of being outside. And just, I don't think I was particularly paying attention to the birds. I'm sure they were there all around me. But I did love to be outside. Years later, when I was in my teens, my father was posted to Shimla. And I think that's when I really began to fall in love with the outdoors, because you had to walk everywhere, and it was fantastic. I mean, there were big clumps of rhododendron bushes and all kinds of birds over there, and it was just fabulous. And I think from that point on in my life, I sort of began to pay attention to what the outside world looked like. But yeah. You never know what's going to hit you and what you'll end up doing with it.
Thanks. I can actually picture a young Uma sitting on this branch of a banyan tree with a book. This is something which I would love to do. I think all kids over there would also
Oh,
love to do that.
it
Mm.
was amazing. I was a very clumsy child, and I had perpetually scraped knees. So my knees were always scabby the entire time. I think I went through childhood with scabby knees, just from scrapes and falls.
Thanks, Uma, for sharing this lovely moment with us. And we are close to our wrapping up this session. Amrita, are there any more questions? Or
There are a couple questions here on Zoom chat, so we'll just quickly take those. One is from Ujan. He is asking, is there a favorite bird that Rini has in the book?
Well, I think Rini ends up falling in love with sunbirds as a result of her experience, and you'll see that play out through the book. But yeah.
So Ujan, to know more why she's fallen in love with sunbirds, do grab a copy and read.
Yeah, and I think if you are if you are between 8 and 12, this will take you a couple of days to zip through. If you are a grown up, it might take you 20 minutes to read the whole thing. It's a pretty quick read, but I hope you enjoy it. And if you're an adult in this audience and you know young readers, I hope you will pass this book along to them too. And you never know where it will lead them.
So related to this, there's an adult, I think, who is Pradeep, who is asking if there are any recommended reads that like from you that will help children curate interest towards birds. So is there any books that you would recommend?
Yeah, so I think I would start with Zai Whitaker's stories about her uncle. And she's written a couple of books. One of them is referenced in my book, Salim, Mamu, and Me. She's written another also for young readers, I think maybe for slightly older young people about him, and that's, I think it's a lovely way to enter an interest in birds by encountering this iconic figure who really is sort of the father of modern Indian ornithology, and birding in India. So that would be my place. I can't say that I'm not completely up to speed on what Indian publishers are doing and what the new books are that are out, this year, last year. But I would definitely go to Penguin and Random House India. There's Indian Publishing now has marvelous offerings from larger presses like HarperCollins and Penguin Random House, but also from smaller presses like Tulika Books in Chennai, which they do incredible books about the outdoors. So I would look at all of those. Look at the website offerings. Look at what the age ranges are for those books, and you'll find treasure troves.
And to add to your list, there's one website called a Story Weaver, which it's like a crowd kind of gathered about stories that people share. There are a lot of different topics, and you can filter it out for science and nature specifically. So yeah, Anurag says he has Salim Mamu and me.
Okay.
That's lovely.
There's the Story
And
Weaver link too.
yes. So we have shared the Story Viewer link in the chat as well. So in case you want to take a look at that website, and also if you want to get your hand on the book, Salim Mamu and me, Mithala shared the Amazon link to that too. Since we are close to closing and people might be dropping off, I have a small request. I'm sharing a link to the feedback form. So it will take you a couple minutes only. So please take out time and fill the form before you leave. You can save it right. You can just copy the link and uh, respond to it after leaving the session as well. But please don't forget to give us your feedback. And are there any questions? Any more questions anyone wants to ask? This is your last chance.
Amrita, will you share the link of the feedback form in the chat?
Yes, I did share the link to
Oh.
the feedback form.
Okay,
Yeah.
I see it now. Thanks.
So I see there are no questions. So we'll then get. So as a closing remark, Uma, there's one question that I would like to ask is, what is something that you would want the kids to learn or take away from the book, and some things that they hold on to after reading Birds on the Brain?
Yeah. So I think I hope that this book points young readers to think about what they care about and how they might speak up on behalf of whatever that interest might be, right? Because young people don't vote, but they do have voices, and I think they should use them. And if there's one thing this era of climate change and global heating is telling us, it's that the adults don't have all the answers. And maybe there's also a little subtext in both Book Uncle and Me and Birds on the Brain about holding elected leaders accountable and making them understand that their job is actually to make the world a better place. Maybe to remind politicians that the human world and the natural world are not two separate things. So maybe that's what I want people to take away from it. But also joy, I think, also just to be joyful, that you can do good and have fun at the same time.
Yes.
So true.
I just, from our earlier conversations, I remember you mentioning how you want them to slow down, to look, to observe, and to enjoy. So I believe that is like a good note to end on, where we hope that you get, if you've not read the book yet, you go check out the book, get a copy for yourself, read it. And once you read it, we hope you will start appreciating birds, you start looking at birds and nature as a whole. And like Uma was saying, most importantly, because kids do have voices and can make change happen, maybe work towards some actionable things towards the well-being of birds and nature as a whole. So we are sharing the link to getting the book Birds on the Brain in the chat as well. So save that link and get a copy for yourself as well. So there
And
goes.
if you have questions for me and things that you want me to answer, where should they send that?
Yes. So if you have some more questions, you would like to connect with Uma with some of your queries or anything, what you can do is you can write to either Early Bird or Bird Count India, and we'll pass on your message to Uma. Yes, so I have shared our email addresses in the chat. You can get in touch with us. You can drop us an email. Tell us that the questions for Uma so that we know that we have to forward it to her. And once we hear back from her, we'll respond to your email there. And
Yeah, Amrita, sorry, go ahead.
no, so I was just saying, and all these links will be there on the YouTube description. So in case you don't save them here or misplace them later, you can always go to the YouTube live stream and find these links in the description.
Thanks, Amrita, and thanks, Uma. Just a reminder for all the people who are joining us for the first time. Early Bird works towards connecting children to nature, while Bird Count India is a group of it's a collaboration of many organizations and birding groups that work together to learn more about birds. For all the adults joining in today, do check out the birding related resources and information on Early Bird and Bird Count India's website, and you can follow us on the social media to stay updated. And thank you, Uma, for joining. It was really wonderful talking to you and hearing this short snippets of what went in making this book. Thanks, Amy and Varsha, for all your help and support. And to all of you viewers, we hope you enjoyed this session as much as we did. And don't forget to check Birds on the Brain and start your birding adventure. And Uma, could you please show the book once in your hand so that...
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes, there you go. So thank you everyone for joining.
Well, it was completely delightful. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Uma. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And just a reminder to fill the feedback form, and you can stay updated by following us on our social media. So, yeah. Thank you so much, Uma, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
See you soon,
Bye-bye.
next month with another session.